Michael, we cannot hear you.
Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to welcome everybody, and thanks for participating in this ISMP webinar titled An Insider's Look at Drug Name Development, Working to Put Look-alike, Sound-alike Drug Name Problems Behind Us. My name's Mike Cohen, and I'm a pharmacist, and I'm president here at ISMP, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for today's program. Let me just tell you very briefly how this got started. I was having a conversation with actually our first speaker today, Dorothy Linville-Neal, who works at Novartis, and we got onto the topic of drug name confusion. And Dorothy takes our students, so we were talking about having one of the students come down here for rotation, and kind of one thing led to another. And I was saying to her that, you know, as far as drug name confusion, and the student was coming down to work on a project with us in that regard, as far as drug name confusion, I think we are seeing a lot less than we saw in the past. About 15, 20 years ago, at the time, we heard from someone at FDA tell us it was about 25% of the medication error problem was related to drug name mix-ups. And we're not seeing anything like that today in our reporting program. And so kind of one thing led to another, and Dorothy volunteered. Dorothy works for Novartis. I'll tell you about her in a minute. But she volunteered to have Novartis actually fund this webinar to discuss not just how the mix-ups occur, but the whole concept of naming a drug when a new medication is going to reach the market. So I think you'll find this very, very interesting webinar today. And we have several speakers, and let me introduce them right now. First is, as I mentioned, Dorothy Linville-Neal. And Dorothy actually is at Novartis. She has over 31 years of experience in global trademark and nomenclature development, in regulatory nomenclature clearance, and in strategic planning. She currently serves as the global head for name creation and regulatory strategy at Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation. Before Novartis, she was head of global trademark development at Johnson & Johnson, and she worked with several other companies before that. She currently is, as I was saying, she takes our students on rotations at Novartis, our Temple students, and she serves as a clinical adjunct professor at the School of Pharmacy and is involved with also with the pharma trademark colleagues of hers and the Food and Drug Law Institute Global Committee. She will be giving us an insider's look at what it takes to develop a brand name for new medication, and in ways that factors in safety to avoid name-related look-alike and sound-alike medication errors. And I was looking at her slides. I got a little preview, and I think there's a lot of learning here, things I didn't know, and I've been involved with drug name safety for quite some time. Now, right after Dorothy is finished, we have Dr. Susan Prue. Susan's a colleague of mine, was really our first employee here at ISMP, and in 2000, she became president of a subsidiary that we formed to concentrate on regulated products, specifically drug naming and labeling and packaging. And she's really an expert in all aspects of preventing medication errors with regulated drug product safety issues. She's been doing this now since 2000, so 17 years just in this particular area. And she's been with ISMP longer than that. So most recently, she's been working pretty closely with human factors engineering folks to collaborate on label safety and drug device usability issues. And she's going to be speaking today on safety testing of medication brand names. Then our third speaker today is Lubna Merchant. And I know Dr. Merchant from FDA. She is a pharmacist, and she currently serves as Acting Deputy Director of the Office of Medication Error Prevention and Risk Management in FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, as some of us know it. She's responsible for the center's programs in risk management and medication error prevention, and she serves as an expert and scientific advisor on medication errors associated with drug and biological products within the center and outside agencies, and provides support and technical expertise on safety recommendations regarding drug naming, labels, packaging, and labeling and product design. She is a pharmacist, as I mentioned, and she works in a variety of healthcare settings. She has worked in a variety of healthcare settings, I should say, including community pharmacy, industry, hospital pharmacy, and she worked as an inpatient pharmacist, did a residency as well in hospital pharmacy, and has also worked as a clinical specialist. And her topic today is she's going to discuss FDA's role in minimizing proprietary name confusion and medication errors. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for joining us, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. So first, the objectives, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about why we're doing this, or observations that I have about the improvement that I think has come over the last 20 years. First of all, we'll be describing the type of problems with error-prone drug names. We'll be stating several steps in the development of a drug name for a pharmaceutical company. We'll identify the benefits of safety testing prior to drug name approval. We'll be discussing FDA's role, as you just heard, in drug naming for medication safety, and also explaining how safety technologies have helped to reduce many name-related mix-ups while at the same time contributing to others in new ways. So just a little bit of background again about why I think, and I think, you know, those of you that are in practice, you know, you've seen these things happening. Really, a lot of people have contributed to improving the safety of drug naming and reducing medication errors. We just don't have the look-alike and sound-alike problems that we had in the past. So one thing for sure, there was a report published in 1999 called To Err is Human, that was published by the Institute of Medicine, and you know, since then there has been a tremendous interest, not just in the United States but around the world, in patient safety. It has grown dramatically, and you know, some of you may know that just recently, this past month in April, the World Health Organization launched a program called the Global Patient Safety Challenge on Medication Safety. So that's going to involve a lot of health ministries and a lot of different countries around the world. So just as it's been a major issue here in the United States, it's growing around the world. Second, more effort throughout the entire healthcare community towards medical error prevention. Since that To Err is Human report, there has been intense, focused efforts on reducing medication errors and all types of medical errors in hospitals, in community practice, in other areas of healthcare. We've done things like develop new professionals that are known as medication safety officers that literally eat, live, and breathe medication safety issues. They follow the literature, they coordinate activities in their organization, they are present in hospitals, in mail service pharmacies, they're present in academia, they're present in pediatrics, they're all over the place. And that also has contributed to safety because they engage people in various pursuits. Medication safety committees have been formed, especially in hospitals. And of course, we see a lot of peer-reviewed publications and a lot of research done and naming and reducing errors that are related to name mix-ups. You know, that has contributed as well. And then there's been more effective reporting of errors. We have a reporting program, and FDA receives all the reports in their MedWatch program, or the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, and the manufacturers are also sent from our program, ISMP's Medication Error Reporting Program, the error reports if it involves one of their products. And I think that has helped because it helps us at ISMP inform the field through our newsletter publications of new problems, obviously not just with drug names, but with other types of medication-related errors as well. And we have a newsletter that is published for acute care every 2 weeks, and we have 4 other newsletters that are either monthly or bi-monthly for consumers, nurses, community pharmacy, and long-term care pharmacy as well. There's been much better communication to the field about these errors. There's been oversight by the Joint Commission and CMS to put together national patient safety goals, which require that hospitals look at drug naming issues. And they were given pairs of drugs, not just brand name mix-ups, but many of them were non-proprietary names that they should be looking at, plus showing the Joint Commission when they visit a hospital what they have done to reduce harm from drug name mix-ups. We've also done things like instead of just receiving a telephone order from a doctor's office or from a doctor within a hospital, nurses or pharmacists are required not only to read it back to them, read the order back and hopefully spell the name of the drug, but also write it down and read it back. So it assures that you have heard it right, but it also assures that you've transcribed it correctly when you read it back. And that is a requirement of the Joint Commission. So surveyors that come into the hospitals ask about that. And I think that has helped a lot as well. Improved design of names by the pharmaceutical industry. There's no question about that. It would be very few companies that would ever chance coming out with a new drug and developing a name and presenting that to FDA without doing some form of safety testing with the field to make sure that that name isn't going to get rejected and set them back perhaps months of time in getting that product launched if they want to have a brand name at all. So that's become a very, very important thing that has also contributed to safety dramatically. And then FDA involvement and putting together guidances and their own screening of drug names when they come in. And Lubna's going to talk about that, exactly how that is done. And also engagement of industry by industry of name testing companies. And then my last slide, development of medication safety technologies. Everyone knows today that in both hospitals and community practice, almost everything we do now is electronic as far as prescribing. So no more handwritten orders in most hospitals. We're up to about 90% now that have computerized their ordering system in most areas of the hospital, if not all. And we have electronic health records. We have electronic medication administration records that the nurses have printed out or use off of a computer screen. So there's no more handwriting there either. And that electronic system drives a whole chain of safety steps. For example, barcoding. Once that name is appropriately entered and processed by the pharmacy, that follows throughout the entire healthcare experience. So that means that both in community pharmacy and certainly in hospitals, when you use barcoding, for example, you can assure that the patient is getting the right drug. You're not reading from a record, and we don't use stocks of drugs up on the nursing unit. Almost everything comes from the pharmacy. So those episodes that we saw in the past where nurses were reading their handwriting or someone else's handwriting and then choosing the drug themselves, we have electronic storage systems now on the nursing unit, automated dispensing cabinets, and all that is in a database. It's all driven by that electronic ordering system. So it's just not anywhere near the problem that we saw in the past. And then finally, involvement of the patient. Publicity about errors to create awareness. We've seen consumer pamphlets. There's websites for consumers to report errors and to learn about errors that might be happening. We have one called consumermedsafety.org that's very active. There's tips for error prevention on that website. We tell people to open the bag before they leave the pharmacy. We've been teaching them that so they can assure they're getting the drug that the doctor told them they were going to be getting. And most important of all is putting the purpose on prescriptions. And there's work underway right now where you will actually be seeing, I think someday soon, indication-based prescribing, where there always will be an indication, a purpose of the medication associated with the medication. So if the medication doesn't make sense to the patient, to the pharmacist, or to the nurse, there's a question that's raised, and you would be able to stop most of the errors that we have seen in the past. So anyway, that's why I think this is why we've seen such improvement over the years, and I think it's celebratory in some ways to have a session like this that's why Dorothy and I thought it would be worthwhile to do it. So we appreciate again your attendance, and I'm going to start off with the speakers. I do want to just say one other thing. Each speaker is going to be speaking for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then after the last speaker, we're hoping to have some time for questions. We're figuring on about 15 minutes or so. So if you have a question for a specific speaker, please jot down the name of the speaker so that you can direct it to that individual. And I hope you're logged onto a computer nearby, and please submit your questions on the portal under the questions pod. You'll see that on the screen or where you're signed in. And if you're logged in using the mobile app, you can ask a question by clicking the question mark located at the top of your screen. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation at any time. We will not be taking any questions over the phone today. And by the way, if you would like a copy of the speaker presentation, you can access it under the handout tab on the GoToWebinar portal. Okay, enough of me. Let's begin with our presentation. And we're going to start out with Dorothy Linville-Neal from Novartis. Dorothy, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was a great introduction, and thank you for the great work that's done here at ISMP. It seems that we've really made great strides. How do you advance the slide?
Yeah, you should be getting control.
Okay, we're just going to wait a minute while we receive the slide advancement. For those of you who aren't familiar with Novartis, we're a global healthcare company employing 123,000 employees in 155 countries. We reached 965 million patients in 2016, and we focus on 6 major disease areas. Our presentation objectives for today include a discussion on pharmaceutical branding. We'll touch on brand name goals and trends, even talk a little bit about some of the naming styles. We'll discuss challenges for global brand names and have an overview of the regulatory process for the review of names, as well as a summary of rejection rates. Process and timing will be discussed, as well as name safety and research. Mike, as you've already done a great job of framing, the Institute of Medicine report, which was released, changed the landscape and the overview of how we had to look at drug development. A newer focus on look-alike and sound-alike drug names became the highest priority, with a focus on the avoidance of medication errors due to inadvertent substitution of drugs, ultimately with the potential of causing patient harm. Pharmaceutical companies must be conscious of balancing patient safety with drug development and commercialization goals. In general, our goals are to initiate the brand name development process approximately 3 years prior to regulatory submission. That's technically about 4 years prior to the launch of the product. The name must be safe for use in the global healthcare environment, available for global trademark registration, approvable by global regulatory authorities, acceptable to healthcare professionals and patient audiences, and appropriate for a diverse global marketing environment. It also needs to be supported by the internal stakeholders within the companies. If we take a look at drug brand naming trends, a lot of the questions that come up as I bring my students in and talk to pharmacists and healthcare practitioners center around the appearance of drug names and why they are so long and why they look so differentiated. And I thank Clement Lucio at Brampersan, who performed a recent trend analysis for us to take a look at some of the construct of the recent names. If we compare drugs back in 2010, the style, the number of syllables, the consonant, vowel, consonant construct, to some of the drugs now, we see a pretty clear differentiation and distinction in the fact that the names are getting longer. We are seeing more unusual consonant clusters. They are also having a lot more phonologic and orthographic distinction in the names, and the ascending and descending letters are of great importance in that this differentiates the name visually in print and in script. Sorry. Drug branding naming styles are a little bit subjective, but I thought I would share what I perceive as 4 of the major buckets of naming styles. So we have a blank canvas name, or an empty vessel name, which really has no notable connection to the product. An aspirational name in its appearance may be inspiring through imagery and also through tonality. The science or mechanistic names typically have a functional connection to the product. For example, Jakafi or Afinitor, the mTOR, and the JAK inhibitor linked to the drug's pathway. Attributes have a tendency to communicate a functional or perhaps an emotional benefit. For example, Jadnu, which is actually the new formulation of Xgene. We have four major hurdles in global brand name clearance and development. And the first centers around the creative aspect. With only 26 letters in the alphabet, it's becoming increasingly difficult to come up with more and more iterations of names. The avoidance of common prefixes in drug names is of paramount importance, given the fact that a large number of medication errors do center around the drug prefixes. In addition, we have to avoid 672 USAN and INN stems based on guidance from regulators and World Health Organization. These stems refer to the stem of the non-proprietary or generic name. For example, celecoxib. Coxib is the stem for the COX-2 classification of drugs. So we need to avoid that in any brand name. Recent guidance has also suggested that we should not be encoding the other elements of the non-proprietary name. So historically, you may have Risperdal and Risperidone as a traditional construct for a drug name. And that's even being something that really we must need to start to avoid. The legal clearance is the next hurdle that we have to face. And in Class 5 U.S. pharmaceutical classification, where companies file their drug names with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, we have 122,000 active filings in the U.S. alone. In 2016, 18,500 were filed for pharmaceutical trademarks, and this increases every year. So this is a very tall order for a trademark attorney to try to clear a global drug name and also to obtain the domain name registration. The third hurdle is really all about the internal buy-in, and part of that process is thinking about the fact that these teams and regulators and research teams have been very emotionally involved with the drug names. There's a lot of passion. It's like naming a baby, but we are in a position where we have name safety and market research along with the legal clearance, which are critical factors which help us guide the decision. We take heavy weight to the outcomes of the safety research, and this enables us to make better decisions as it relates to the safety potential for a name. Finally, the regulatory hurdle, which comes toward the end of the process, which has the highest vulnerability, is when we expose these names to the key regulators around the world with very specific guidances and requirements. Just to give you a sense of what some of those requirements are, the FDA, which Lubna will provide much more of an elaboration on, has a multifactorial approach. They will generate data around a name that a sponsor submits. We are permitted to submit one name, and the timeline for the review of a name during the IND phase is 6 months, and it's 3 months under the NDA or BLA review. The EMA, European Medicines Association Name Review Group, is a group which reviews the filings for the centralized procedure which pharmaceutical companies can utilize to have a product approved across all 28 member states. The hurdle there is that all 28 member states must have a harmonized decision on the suitability of a specific name. Given all the languages spoken across the EMA, this is a very tall order as well. We are enabled to permitted to submit 2 names to the name review group in Europe, which does give us some nice opportunities to have an additional backup. Health Canada recently revised their guidance, and they have very stringent requirements as well, in which they will not perform the data as the FDA does, and the sponsor must perform the research and submit the data with the package. Other countries around the world have varied methods. Some of them incorporate a 3-letter rule, which requires that any specific drug name must have 3 letters in differentiation from any other registered product. And there is, of course, a proliferation of unused names that are within the registries, within these regulators, which create a lot of clutter for us to surpass. Other regulatory considerations include the fact that while all regulators are evaluating names for the same reasons, patient safety, looking for look-alike, sound-alike names, and that potential for inadvertent substitution, their opinions and their methods differ, and the determinations are not always consistent. This is increasing the complexity given the fact that each country has a differing pharmaceutical nomenclature landscape and prescribing practices. Therefore, if we have a name that's approved with FDA, it doesn't necessarily mean that the EMA will approve the name. EMA may not approve a name that the FDA has approved, and vice versa with Health Canada and other regulators. The brand name for a new product may not be certain until shortly before FDA or EMA approval, and this centers around the fact that if a name is rejected, and there are relatively significant rejection rates, we may be negotiating the name until well into the submission and regulatory approval process. Therefore, we must always have contingency plans. This depiction suggests that the recent trend is that the FDA rejection rates are going down. Kudos to Lubna and her team. They can speak to that. And the EMA have been consistent with about a 50% rejection rate, but we must be mindful of the fact that the EMA reviews more names than the FDA, given their availability of submitting more names at the same time. So how do we avoid rejection? We'll talk a little bit about a typical process with a pharmaceutical company. Centers around four major aspects. The first is the creative aspect. Starting early is of paramount importance. Many companies will bring in naming agencies. Some companies like to do contests or develop the names themselves. We will have cross-functional teams comprised of regulatory, commercial, trademark, legal, and other areas of the company to bring in cross perspectives and work on a branding strategy. There's a significant amount of pre-screening that's done in that phase, and that's going to be covered a little later in our presentation. Most companies will develop multiple naming platforms to ensure that we don't have a single style that could be problematic at the end of the process. We've already discussed the trademark legal, which takes place into the next phases, as well as the global research, which I'll elaborate on in the next slide. Once this global research is completed, we'll bring forth recommendations for internal endorsement. We would then prepare to activate the submissions to the health authorities and begin the negotiation process. Many companies will start with the EMA and take an EMA-approved name to the FDA. There are preliminary approvals in some instances, but the final approvals will come as the process vests. Rejections are prominent, and appeals are an appropriate pathway in some instances. So companies will evaluate the basis of the appeal and make a determination whether they will push back to the health authorities and provide additional information. Ultimately, we achieve those final approvals and move on with the global submissions. So what's in the research for a name? We have so much criteria that we have to fill. The name really has to be suitable, fit the concept, be easy to pronounce. Personal preference are very important. They want the names to be likable and be legally available, to be memorable, and also to be free of negative associations. So our research is multifactorial, and we perform both qualitative and quantitative research on a global basis. This also includes patients and caregivers. Lubna will touch a lot on what the FDA does in terms of the name safety metrics. The marketing metrics are self-explanatory, and as far as the linguistic aspects, they're very important. We need to look at least 25 languages with native speakers to ensure that the names are free of any inappropriate or negative connotations. Even looking at translations or direct transliterations of names is a critical step to ensure that there is global acceptability of the name. Attrition, as you can see, over 500 names can be generated at the onset of a process. Approximately 250 to 300 will be viewed by the project team, resulting in about 120 names to go to cursory legal. Ultimately, you may have 40 names which clear that first step of legal, and companies may test up to 30 names. It varies by company, but at the end of the day, once the research is performed and that name safety provides us with critical insights as to the suitability or risk associated with names, along with the full legal that is performed for the availability of the trademark to be owned as a registration, that winnows down to approximately 6 to 12 names. Again, this varies by company, but as you can see, the attrition is quite great. The road to this global trademark is not an easy one, not necessarily straightforward. We must be comprehensive, proactive, and rigorous. Strategies for success. What can we do to ensure that we get it right, that we get the best name out there, and it's processed and delivered on time with the product within the regulatory timeframes? We need to perform our due diligence during the name development throughout the whole process, being proactive. The conduct of the name safety and the market research is critical prior to submission to health authorities. It's very important to understand the various nomenclature review processes, the distinctions, the overlaps, staying abreast of new procedures and guidances, and also participating actively in public process review of those guidance documents. Maintaining open communication with internal stakeholders is also very important to ensure that there is a direct line of communication to make decisions regarding any rejections that might come in, but also to be responsive to inquiries that we may receive regarding medication error reports, and to advise the proper safety experts internally to look at any situations that occur, perform a root cause analysis, and be prepared to act responsibly. We need to abandon name candidates which present risk. We have to be flexible with modifications. Often this may mean tweaking a letter or two in a name. And of course, we have to love our backups. In summary, patient safety continues to be the high priority for industry, FDA, global regulators, World Health Organization, and other key stakeholders. The continued partnership is critical among the health authorities and industry, the PSOs, named safety testing companies, and these stakeholders to determine how to best continuously improve patient safety, reduce medication errors, and review proposed proprietary names. Patients also play a key role in error prevention, and I thought Mike did a brilliant job of outlining the emerging role that patients play in ensuring that their drugs are the right drugs and that there's avoidance of medication errors on all levels. Overall, we have a common goal, which is error prevention and enhanced predictability in name reviews. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorothy. And next, our next speaker is Susan Prue. Susan, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. So Dorothy gave you a very high-level overview of what goes into developing a name. And what I'm going to do is focus a little bit on what we and other companies do related to this, what we call safety testing of the brand name. She talked about linguistics, she talked about legal, all those things, but we're going to focus on the part that I think some of the people even in the audience may get involved with, the practitioners, because they may be involved because we use practitioners in our testing. So, so what we do is safety test potential trademarks. The companies hire us, people like us, to look at the safety standpoint, and that can obviously impact regulatory approval. Companies do a lot more testing, as Dorothy mentioned. However, what obviously we think is important, and what also the FDA thinks important, is to make sure that the names will not have any look or sound alike similarity, or will not have any promotional issues in order to approve them. So that's what we do. So what the group that Lubna is involved in, the type of work that we and other medication safety companies get involved in, is similar to what they're doing at the FDA once the name is submitted. As Dorothy mentioned, you start out with a very large list of names. We don't see those names, luckily. We wait until the names are decreased through all those other avenues that she mentioned, and then we'll start our process. I'm focusing mostly on the U.S., even though testing is done globally when needed. For companies like Novartis, it's a global company. depending on where they are located or where they're going to market their product. We focus on those particular countries. But in the U.S. specifically, it's not mandatory to do this type of safety testing, but as Dorothy alluded to as well, most companies do it these days in order to at least get an internal read as to how their names would potentially fare at the FDA. So this is the type of process that we use that I'm sure is similar to other companies as well. We call ours the AIRS model, and what we're trying to do is simulate the drug use process. So we're looking at how a product, not just how the names are against each other or how similar or different they are, but how the products would be looking at each other, the clinical and non-clinical attributes of the product. So we use 5 steps in our process, which are listed below. I'm going to go through each one of these briefly. First, we have the client input. So someone like Dorothy would call us and say, hey, we have a project. We have a sheet that they fill out, which gives us the names that they want to test, as well as the clinical information about the product that those names would be attached to. We typically get about 10 names from clients, but as mentioned before, you can test more. Some people like 25 to 30 names because they want a higher success rate once the testing is completed and more options to choose from when they're doing their submission. We then need, as I mentioned, the clinical information about the product because we're going to use that as part of our analysis. And that obviously can impact on whether 2 names can coexist. If the products are very different, that can impact positively, and maybe they can both coexist. We also may get the pronunciation if applicable, but as we learned over the years, people pronounce things differently, and I'm not even just talking about one country to another. Even within countries, people pronounce things. People joke about me because I have a Boston accent, so I drop my R's often at the end of names. So we like people to pronounce things themselves, even when companies give us pronunciation guidelines. I, as a former practitioner, watch TV commercials these days and hear a drug name being pronounced, and I think, oh my gosh, all these years I've pronounced it differently. So it really is a personal thing, even though there may be an official way that the name is supposed to be pronounced. Once we get the initial information from a client, we think about how we're going to coordinate the project. And as we said, many companies want to safety test the names globally. However, practically, it's almost impossible to test in virtually every country. So what most clients will do is choose the countries that they want you to test in because of timing and also because of it's very cost prohibitive. So we generally test in the countries that are listed below, but often others will come up as well. One thing we've seen with clients is if they've had some regulatory hurdles in a particular country, they may want to choose that one specifically to include. But generally, if it's a global product, you're going to test in the EU, the US, some Asian countries, something in South America, etc. So we take the product information and we compile it into an online survey. The names are scripted, and as Mike said, even though 90% of hospital prescriptions are electronic these days, or orders are electronic, there are still orders or prescriptions that are handwritten, so we do want to include that. You want to look at handwritten, typed, and then verbal as well. We send these surveys to our practitioners who are going to participate in an online survey, and these are the types of people we use. Now, we don't use just anyone. We look at what the product is, how it's going to be used as part of the drug use process, and we determine who would be a participant in the survey because they would be the people actually seeing and touching and pronouncing and writing for these products. Generally, the survey is very simple. It lasts 20 to 30 minutes, but that will depend on how many names we are asking our practitioners to look at. They complete it within a set amount of time, and they submit it back to us. The questions that they're asked are listed at the bottom of this slide. we ask them to let us know when they look at a name whether they think it looks like any other drug name that is out in the market in their country. We ask them to pronounce the name and ask them to see if it sounds like any other drug name in their country. But as many of you may know, it isn't just one drug that could be confused with another drug. So we also think about medical terms. Could a drug be confused with a device, or is there an abbreviation as part of that name that could potentially be an issue or confusing? And then once we ask all those questions, so it's look-alike, sound-alike, drug, medical term, abbreviation, medical advice. Does it look or sound like anything to you? How likely do you think that confusion would occur? And if it did occur, what do you think the harm would be? So those are the questions that we ask our practitioners. So recently, or I guess it's been a few years now, another tool to generate data, besides the online practitioner survey, is a search modality called POCA, which stands for Phonetic and Orthographic Computer Analysis. And Lubna will talk about that. That is something that was actually developed by the US FDA and made public so that anyone who can download this program can use it to search drug databases for similarity, orthographic and phonetic similarity between two drug names. It also can give you the ranking of how similar drug names are to all the drugs within that database. So the FDA uses two drug databases, which we use as well, for US testing, which is the Drugs at FDA and RX Norm. This is an example of the version that is now out. FDA updated the version late last year, and actually I think it's simpler to use and added some other parts to it where you can actually compare one drug to another, and that was a new feature which I find personally very helpful. Some positives and negatives. POCA is not the be-all and end-all, but it does provide you with an additional piece of raw data as part of your analysis to make sure that you're covering as much as you can and you don't miss anything. But the positives are that it's automated. So if I run the program one day and you run it the next day on the same names using the same threshold, we should get the same results. So it makes it reproducible. It's objective. It's not what the practitioners are saying may look or sound like something. It's an objective based on a linguistic set of equations that, again, Lubna can talk about. And they have correlated this to name confusion errors that they've seen, lists that they've developed and tested against their POCA. Some of the negatives about it is it doesn't include the product characteristics. So you really need people to look at the clinical criteria versus the name attributes. POCA is great for name attributes, but not for the clinical criteria. And we know that can increase or decrease confusion. And it doesn't account for other types of confusion where when we talk about look and sound alike, we're looking at upstrokes and downstrokes of letters, for example, when they're printed or scripted. But there are other types of name confusion that we've seen that it can't take into consideration at this point. And there's a lot of false positives and false negatives because this is a computer-generated program. So you need to sort through all those as you're doing your analysis. So once we get the raw data from our practitioners back, and we get it back through our POCA search, we then collate that data, and as a group, MEDAIR staff sits down and performs a failure mode and effects analysis. We look at each and every response and look up. Sometimes we don't have all the information. We have drug information databases available to determine whether something's an active product, for example, or whether that particular brand's name is still available. Perhaps the brand has gone off market and only the generic is available. And then we're looking at all the drug use process that we know about, from the time that a drug is purchased to the time that it is dispensed, recorded, and reordered. And we want to see if the names that the practitioners have come up with in the survey or the names that are generated in POCA could potentially actually be confused with the names that we're testing for our client. And if it is a problem anywhere in that drug use process, we have to determine whether it's a deadly problem, so to speak, or not. I think most people in the audience knows what failure mode and effects analysis is, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview in case for a few of you that are not familiar. It's the risk assessment method that we use. Here at ISMP and Metters, we live and breathe FMEA. We look at everything through this type of process, but it's a risk assessment of a complex process that breaks down the process into a step-by-step fashion. So in this case, we're looking at the drug use process for a particular drug name that would go through this process. We want to see where any failures could potentially occur in this drug use process, i.e. in this case meaning a drug name being confused with another drug. And we look to see where the errors would occur and how serious the outcome would potentially be. That's how we're doing our analysis. We also will analyze the POCA results. FDA has provided guidance to us, to the industry, on how similar or different the names when they're coming out should be analyzed. And basically, anything with a threshold of 55 or above. So if a drug name is an identical match in the database, for example, it would have a score of 100%. And then the names that are less and less similar get lower and lower scores. The FDA considers anything below 55 to be less significant, and this is the way that they want you to analyze it. So you start looking more at the clinical characteristics. Sometimes if two names are highly similar, the clinical characteristics are actually less important because the names are so close that it may be the similarities of the name that could be enough to make you be concerned and not use it or not consider it acceptable. So we do our analysis similar to the questions that we ask our practitioners. We're going through each response of POCA and the survey saying, does this look like the other name that has come up as a potential confusability, look-alike, or sound-like confusion? And then again, likelihood of error, looking at the clinical context of the product, and then we also, as I mentioned, looked at the promotional aspects of it. So we think about, we ask our practitioners, do you consider this name offensive, or do you consider it to not match the indication, for example, which we actually consider a potential safety issue. If you think a drug name looks like something for sleep, but it's really for hypertension, is there a potential for you to actually confuse that product? And then there are a couple other aspects of it that we look at as well, which is looking at the stems of names. For example, we know as practitioners, OLOL is for beta blockers. There are certain regulations, not only in the U.S., but in other regulatory areas that tell you how acceptable use of a stem is or isn't within each region. And it's not all exactly the same. But we want to make sure that we're following those regulations based on the countries in which we're testing. Finally, we generate a report with all the names that we have tested for the client, and we give them a score or a rating. And really that rating is for internal use for the client, so they know where we stand on that name, whether we think it's low vulnerability, meaning that we consider the name safe, meaning less likely to be confused, down to not recommending it and being highly vulnerable, meaning we think there's a lot of risk and that name should probably not be considered as they move forward. So basically, some clients will use a report such as what we generate to internally to make as part of their decision making. They have all those other factors that Dorothy mentioned that they consider as well. Other companies will want to use the report as part of their submission. We often encourage clients to submit those reports, but it's really their decision. If they want to use it or not, we would create a report with only the one name in it, not with the 10 that we've tested. And they can submit that as part of their NDA or BLA to the FDA. I think that is my last slide, and I will hand it over to Lubna. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So Dorothy and Sue gave an excellent overview of what goes in name development and how the names are tested for safety. I'm going to talk about what FDA's role is in minimizing proprietary name confusion, and as Sue did, talk about a little bit about how we test the name. Oops, I'm having trouble moving the slides. Okay. So I'm going to talk about our role in pre-marketing and post-marketing activities to address name confusion, medication errors, talk about how FDA evaluates proprietary name, and also want to discuss some of the methods we use to manage proprietary name confusion when we identify them post-approval. So before I get into how we evaluate proprietary name, I want to just give you an overview of who we are and what we do. So within FDA, we are the CDER, or Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, in the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology. And we sit under the Office of Medication Error Prevention and Risk Management, or the group that does the proprietary name reviews sits under that office. The group that does the review is called Division of Medication Error Prevention and Analysis. From now on, I'm going to refer to it as DMEPA. DMEPA's mission really is to increase the safe use of drug products by minimizing use error that is related to naming, labeling, packaging, or design of drug products. The division consists of healthcare professionals with varied backgrounds. We have pharmacists with retail experience in a retail setting, hospital setting, industry, etc. We have nurses. We have a biomedical engineer in our staff as well. And although not currently in our employ, we did have physicians until recently as well. So what does DMEPA do? We do the proprietary name reviews for all applications that come into the FDA, so for all new drug applications, biologics, investigational new drugs, and you'll hear a lot more about how we do it in the upcoming slides. Other than that, we also do pre-marketing label and labeling, packaging, and product design assessment. You heard Mike mention about human factors. Our group also does human factors and usability study. And for those who are unfamiliar with human factors engineering, it's really the scientific discipline that's concerned with the understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of the system. And system, by system here, I mean it represents the physical, cognitive, and organizational artifacts that people interact with. And really the goal of doing these studies is to demonstrate that the applicant has optimized the user interface, whether it's a drug device, whether it's instructions for use, whether it's label and labeling, they've optimized that user interface to support the safe and effective use when the representative users use these products in the expected use environment. So for these studies, we review the protocol as well as the results of the studies. DMEPA is also responsible for post-marketing medication error surveillance and analysis. And then we are involved in various committees and work groups as well. We are part of the NICMERP, the USB Safe Medication Use and Nomenclature Standards. We are part of the Joint Commission. We are members of the Health Canada's Expert Advisory Committee for Naming and Labeling. And within FDA, DMEPA is responsible for developing medication error-related guidances, policies, and procedures. And one such guidance, Dorothy and Sue mentioned, is related to the proprietary name, the best practices for developing proprietary names. Just to give you a little perspective of how busy we are, we do about 1,500 to 1,800 medication error-related reviews per year for drug products. Before I get into how we evaluate name confusion, I want to briefly talk about some of the contributing factors we have to consider when looking at this name confusion. We all know environmental and human factor. There are factors that contribute to to just medication errors in general. The stressful work environment, frequent interruptions and distractions, poor lighting, noise level. In addition, we have what we call confirmation bias that plays a big contributing role especially in medication errors related to names that may be orthographically similar. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, or recall information in a way that confirms one's belief or hypotheses. When a product has been on the market for a few years, our familiarity with the name may cause this confirmation bias. We tend to see which is most familiar while overlooking any discomforting evidence. I'll give folks a minute to read the slide on that's being projected, and it's interesting that the letters, the word that the human mind reads the word as a whole, even though the letters are interchanged, we have no trouble at all forming the words. We all know that illegible handwriting played a big role in confusion in look-alike, sound-alike names. And with the increasing adoption of electronic prescribing, CPOE in healthcare settings, it does create opportunities to enhance patient safety, but at the same time introduces the potential for new types of prescribing and dispensing errors. Here I have a couple of examples that we've seen in the recent years with the adoption of electronic prescribing. The first example, Brintellix and Brilinta, both of the names start with identical 3 letters. However, the ending of the name have differing letters. Also, the product characteristics are actually different for this name pair. But we've seen errors occurring in this name pair, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, of how we've addressed the errors or the name confusion for this name pair. The second example is also an interesting one. The name Ranexa is completely embedded in tranexamic acid. So when someone types Ranexa in the CPOE system, the name tranexamic acid is pulled up, and we actually had an error of someone prescribing who was supposed to receive Ranexa got tranexamic acid because the nurse thought that was just the established name for Ranexa or the generic form of Ranexa. Another thing we need to consider is the rules of label and labeling. We typically see confusion enhanced when these bottles are stored next to each other and they share sort of the trade dress. In the example I've provided here, the names are somewhat similar, but really what's contributing to the confusion also is the similar label and labeling, the white background with the blue highlight, the 30 tablets versus 30 count, etc., 30 milligrams, etc. Here are some more examples I've listed that talk about the look-alike trade dress. And I'd like to point your attention to the last example, the Norvasc and Zyrtec. Here the proprietary names are actually very different from each other, but you can see how selection errors could occur because the trade dress is almost identical with the white background and the blue highlight highlighting the 10 milligram strength. So when we review a proprietary name that is submitted to us by a manufacturer, we kind of use a 3-pronged approach. We do a misbranding assessment, and I'll tell you exactly what the misbranding assessment is in the upcoming slide, but that's done by our colleagues in the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. We also solicit input from the Office of New Drugs, where the new drug application actually comes into, and we ask them to provide us with any safety concerns that they might have on the name based on clinical, chemistry, or pharmacological data that may impact the acceptability of the name. We also conduct, the Division of Medication Error Prevention Analysis conducts the bulk of the work, the safety assessment for the proprietary name, to identify, whether there is any misleading factors or any drug names out there that might be confused with the proposed proprietary name and may lead to medication errors. So as I mentioned, misbranding assessment is done by our colleagues in the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. And what they really look for is to see if there is a proprietary name, if the proprietary name suggests that the drug is safer or more effective than has been demonstrated by scientific evidence. So for example, if we came across the name Bestpred or SafePred for prednisone, the definition of best is most advantageous or suitable or desirable. Safe means protected from or not exposed to danger or free from harm. So therefore, a proposed proprietary name that contains or sounds like such a word implies superiority by suggesting it has some advantages when compared to other available therapies. And in the absence of appropriate scientific evidence to support such claims, we would then reject a name saying that this is misleading. The next step for us is to do a preliminary screening for all the proposed proprietary names that we receive. And this is something that we also recommend in our guidance. Manufacturers do this as sort of a first step before they do a full safety assessment. We, of course, want to see that there is no obvious similarity in spelling and pronunciation to the proposed proprietary name to some other name that's already existing out there, whether it's a proprietary name, established name, or an ingredient of other products. We also recommend they screen against medical abbreviations. There are no medical abbreviations incorporated in the name. And it's important to note that it's not only the presence of medical abbreviations, but also we review for the prominence and placement of that abbreviation within the name. So for example, U is a common abbreviation for unit. It's unreasonable for us to say that a sponsor can't have U in a name, but it really depends on where they are placing it and how the prominence of that particular letter is or word is to make sure it's not misinterpreted as an element of a prescription order. The other thing we recommend against is referencing an inert or inactive ingredient in a name in such a way that creates an impression that the ingredient's value is greater than its true functional role in the formulation. Also, for products that have multiple ingredients in them, we recommend that if sponsors want to go the route of naming their product with the name of the ingredients, then the name should contain all of the ingredients or should reference all of the ingredients, but they can't just reference one ingredient. In that instance, the name can mislead the end user by implying that the product contains only one ingredient that's included in the name. Use and stem, I think Dorothy and Sue both covered that. We do not allow use and stems within the names. Use and stems really are intended to designate a pharmacological class or chemical trait of the drug. So it's likely that a single stem will be applicable to multiple drug products. So you can see if you start allowing stems in a proprietary name, you'll start seeing proprietary names that look similar to established names, multiple proprietary names that might look similar because of the presence of the stem. Or if its stem is used inconsistently, let's say it's used in a name which does not belong to that pharmacological class, then it's misleading. We also, when we evaluate, we also consider that if the manufacturer is using the same proprietary name for another product with a completely different active ingredient. And finally, we do not allow the name to be reused after discontinuation for another product which has a completely different active ingredient. We've often seen proprietary names are used in prescribing for extended period of time after product is discontinued. And sometimes we may even see it continue to appear in drug product references text for extended periods of time. So for those reasons, we don't allow names being reused for another product. After we've done the preliminary assessment, we then move on to a full safety assessment of the name. And what that really entails is we look at the spelling of the name, the pronunciation of the name, and as Sue mentioned, we consider different dialects as well. And the appearance of the name when scripted throughout the medication use system. Several components are assessed in this assessment. We look at the similarity in printing, writing, and speech, as I mentioned. We conduct a name simulation study. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. And then we identify look-alike, sound-alike names by using FDA's phonetic and orthographic computer analysis program that Sue had alluded to, and I'll talk a little more about this program as well in the upcoming slides. Our name simulation study is done to The purpose of the study is to test how participants respond to a proposed proprietary name when presented with a simulated real-world use condition. Given the confidential and proprietary nature of a proposed proprietary name, this study is limited to the internal FDA participants only. We reach out to our healthcare providers within FDA who are nurses, pharmacists, physicians, etc., and solicit response from them on how they interpret a particular name. The name simulation studies that come back are then carefully analyzed to identify any potential signals. So here is an example of what a typical prescription study looks like. We have an inpatient study that we send, online paper, an outpatient study, and a verbal prescription as well. And as mentioned, we try to mimic the real world scenario. So for example, if we anticipate that the product will be written, if it comes in a single strength and the strength may be dropped on a prescription, we'll try to avoid the strength in one of those. If we anticipate the product can be written as use as directed, take as directed, or with abbreviated directions, we'll try to mimic that scenario as well. So we try to keep it as close to a real world scenario as possible. When the results come back, we do look at it from a quantitative and a qualitative perspective. We see how many times a participant has interpreted a prescription correctly and how many times it was misinterpreted. For the misinterpretations, was the name misinterpreted as maybe another name that's marketed already? Were there any specific trends in misspelling? And were there any other concerns that the participants had noted in the study? And in this slide, this shows the typical study results that we receive. Finally, I'll move on to how we identify names with orthographic spelling and phonetic similarities. So Sue mentioned we use an analytical tool called POCA, or Phonetic and Orthographic Computer Analysis. This tool was specifically designed by FDA for this purpose, to help us identify names that are phonetically and orthographically similar to one another. It is publicly available, so manufacturers can use this to test their own proprietary names, see if they identify names that are very similar. We hope that manufacturers do this testing on their own, so that the names, so if they identify names that are similar to other marketed products, they can consider not submitting those names. POCA uses algorithms to assign similarity scores for drug names. So there is an orthographic algorithm and there is a phonetic algorithm. The system was built by linguistics and uses their expertise in the algorithms. The algorithms are designed to assess the similarities using different parameters. So for example, the orthographic algorithm uses various parameters. It has weightage on the front end of the name. And this was a recent addition to the POCA program that we've made a modification based on what we are seeing in the post-marketing environment of how drug names are confused nowadays. So weightage is on the front end of the name. We also know that there is different phenomena of why sometimes drug names look similar. Sometimes it might be a letter string or a sequence of letters that might be present in both names. So the algorithm takes that into account as well. So there is various factors that the algorithm takes into account to spit out a orthographic score. Similarly, the phonetic score is assigned as well. And then finally, there is a combined score, which is simply the arithmetic mean of the orthographic and the phonetic scores. Like Sue mentioned, we use a threshold of 55%. And the threshold of 55% is used based on the validation work that was done on the POCA algorithm. We know the combined measure of similarity has been positively correlated to the errors involving name confusion. We do look at 3 categories of similarities: highly similar name pairs, that is names presenting with a combined score of greater than 70%, moderately similar name pairs 55 to 69%, and finally low similarity name pairs. Those are the combined match scores of less than 54%. Sue mentioned the higher the score, the greater similarity of the proposed name to the name identified in POCA. And again, I want to emphasize, research has shown us that names involved in post-marketing medication errors due to prescribing or dispensing the wrong drug we have seen a higher degree of similarity than the drugs names that were not involved in these type of medication errors. The POCA queries the name against drug reference databases. Sue mentioned we query against drugs at FDA to get all the approved names, as well as RxNome to capture any approved, unapproved, or over-the-counter products. We also point to an internal list of proposed proprietary names, and this list is only internal to FDA and contains other proposed proprietary names that are in the pipeline to make sure we don't approve two similar-looking names at the same time. Now, POCA was not designed to evaluate the influence of product characteristics. We know product characteristics may increase or decrease the potential for confusion. Therefore, we have to do a manual review of the product characteristics to fully assess the potential for name confusion. Our root cause analysis from post-marketing errors have shown that shared strength or dose can contribute to confusion between drugs with similar names. Conversely, evaluation of these post-marketing errors also leads us to conclude that differences in strength may actually help mitigate the risk of confusion. So I've provided a couple examples here on the slide. The first one, Avandia and Coumadin, they have a modest orthographic similarity score of 53%. But because of the overlapping product strength of 2 to 4 milligrams, we have seen errors between this name pair. Conversely, the name pair provided at the bottom of the slide, Intunib and Invega, we have, again, only seen confusion with the overlapping strength of 3 milligrams and not seen confusion with this name pair when there are differing strengths. Now, on the contrary, when we have highly similar name pairs, it's based on our root cause analysis of post-marketing errors that the risk of confusion between the highly similar name pairs can withstand differences in product characteristics. So in other words, if two products have highly similar names, differences in the product profile will not sufficiently mitigate the risk of confusion. Again, I've provided here 2 examples of showing how different these 2 product characteristics, the product profile for these name pair is. Celebrex is IV product. The dosage form is very different, route is different, indication is different, but we've seen confusion with Celebrex. And similarly, we've seen confusion with Capidex and Casodex, given the different strengths and dose because of the high score. Our final determination of the acceptability of a particular proprietary name is based on our review of all the information and analysis. So we look at what we have identified in our internal assessment based on the name simulation studies, based on POCA findings, our findings of the product characteristics, based on input from OPDP, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, as well as Office of New Drugs. We may reject a name if, based on this information, we determine that the name can cause confusion with other products and can result in a medication error, or if the name is misleading with respect to the therapeutic effectiveness, composition, or safety of the product. I want to switch gear a little bit and talk about how we manage post-marketing name confusion. There are some options available for managing name confusion post-marketing, and each has their advantages and disadvantages. Alerts. These are the communication and outreach measures that are done by the applicant as well as FDA to alert practitioners about a confusion once identified. So we will work with the applicant and they will send out healthcare provider letters to alert prescribers or physician or pharmacist about a possible confusion. We also do drug safety communications and to also alert healthcare providers about this confusion. I've attached a link of a DSC that was issued by FDA on medication errors resulting from confusion between Brintellix and Brilinta. Sometimes we take an approach of changes in the label and labeling of the container labels. This approach is usually taken when the name confusion is increased by products having similar labeling and close proximity to each other. So some of the examples that I showed before, sometimes we find that making changes in the labels may help mitigate the risk of confusion, make sure that the labels have better visual differentiation between the two products. We can do that by incorporation of different font size, style, layout, color, etc. We've also sometimes used the approach of tall man lettering. Tall man refers to a lettering style that uses mixed case or enlarged letters, different font, different size, or different style of letters to emphasize the differing portions of the two names. We have studies that show highlighting section of words using tall man lettering can improve healthcare practitioners' ability to distinguish similar drug names. Tall man lettering is found to be more effective when healthcare practitioners are aware of the reason for its application. And although there is some evidence to support the use of tall man letters to reduce the risk of confusion between lookalike drug names, there is little evidence out there to recommend which of the dissimilar letters in each drug name pair should be highlighted. Proprietary name change. Again, a proprietary name change, changing a proprietary name when identified a confusion post-marketing has its advantages and disadvantages. Obviously the advantage is changing an error-prone name, thus eliminating the root cause of that confusion. Sometimes it is unclear if there's a limited period of time in which it is prudent to change an error-prone name. We may also consider, disruption in the potential drug supply, and there might be some confusion during the proprietary name switch period. But on the slide, I have listed an example of a proprietary name change that was recently done by the FDA. In July of 2015, we issued a drug safety communication, and this was subsequent to the manufacturer's attempt to issue various alerts and healthcare provider letters to alert prescribers about this confusion between Brintellix and Brilinta. Despite the DSC, we continue to receive additional cases on this confusion. And finally, we worked with the Brintellix manufacturer to change the drug's name, and it was subsequently changed to Trintellix. So far, we have not identified any cases of confusion with this new name on the market. And finally, to summarize, I think we've made the point throughout the presentation how similar looking and sounding names have led to medication errors and name confusion errors. And I've kind of talked about what limited options we do have to manage proprietary name confusion post-marketing, with each having its advantage and disadvantages. We really think the best strategy to reduce medication errors with proprietary name confusion is really pre-marketing name assessment. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Lubna, and also Susan and Dorothy. Thank you very much for your presentations. They were great. And we have time for questions now. And we do have a bunch of questions listed, and I'm going to go over them. If you want to add a question real quickly, I'm not sure we're going to have time to answer them all. I'll choose, from the list in here. But there is a section on your screen to submit a question. Enter your question under the tab marked questions, and just type the message in the box, and then hit return, and we should get the question. So let's go back to the beginning. And some of you entered slide numbers. It's going to make it difficult, unless you fully explain, it's going to make it difficult to get back to individual slides, but we'll try to do our best here. There was a question about, we had a couple actually, about guidances that were mentioned. Well, I mentioned the guidance anyway on my slide. And has it become law yet? And I was talking about FDA guidance statements. And Lubna, why don't you explain what a guidance is as far as law, quote unquote, or regulation?
Sure. Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can explain. So the guidance really is a document that represents the current thinking of the FDA on a particular topic. It really does not establish any rights for any person. It is not binding on FDA or the public. And we always, and the guidances are usually intended for industry. In particular, if you're talking about the guidance for the proprietary name, that's the guidance, again, intended for industry. It outlines the best practices in developing proprietary names for prescription drug products. It's a non-binding document, so it's certainly not a law. We always entertain an alternative approach. If the applicant proposes to use an alternate method, we will certainly entertain that, and we will review that as well.
Very good. And then there's a question about something that I commented on regarding opening the bag. I was talking about opening the bag campaigns, and this is not done by mail service pharmacies. Somebody pointed out that that's correct. And they'd be interested to know if the number of errors differ by type of pharmacy, mail order, community pharmacy, hospital, et cetera. We don't have any data like that. I can tell you that there is a vast reduction in patients actually taking the wrong medication at home if they simply open the bag and look at the label of the product before they leave the pharmacy. And that's what we have been promoting. And some of that has been drug name mix-ups. Here's a question, maybe, Lubna, again, maybe this is for you. Now that the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union, does this mean a separate regulatory authority for medicines in the United Kingdom? Do you know that?
Sorry, I'm not able to comment on that.
Yeah, I might be able to help actually. Yes, it does. They will no longer be part of the European Union, so they will have to have their own regulatory authority. So the next one of the challenges once a drug is released to the market is that the drug can acquire a nickname or an abbreviated drug name while the drug is in development or in research use, and then it sticks with the product even after the drug is marketed. These names seem to be difficult to eliminate from use down the road, and a couple of examples were given here, and they're drug name abbreviations, MTX for methotrexate and TPA for alteplase. Susan, maybe you can comment on that, drug nicknames and how they happen and what we might be able to do about that.
Yeah, I think most of the nicknames that I've seen, in the past and what I hear about is more the non-proprietary names and not the brand names. So even though, as Dorothy mentioned, brand names are getting longer, the generic names are even longer, especially these NIBs and NIBs and MABs. And so I think people tend to use nicknames related more to the non-proprietary or the generic names versus the brand names. I don't know if you guys...
I think historically, orthotricycline was abbreviated as OTC in many instances, but there was some education and awareness around scripting the entire drug name.
Yeah, there's lots of examples of that. How are scientific names vetted to guard against sound-alike, look-alike names, considering that the scientific names of drugs in the same drug class often share the same suffix? I don't know that they share the same. When we think of a suffix, I think we're thinking, well, yeah, they could. Stem, I think, would be a more appropriate word than suffix. But, can somebody answer that? How are scientific names vetted, the non-proprietary name? Susan?
Sure. This is Lubna. I can start and then others can chime in. So the non-proprietary name for small molecules is done by or is assigned by the USAN, United States Adopted Names Council. FDA does have a liaison which sits on the USAN Council, and we are occasionally consulted. If USAN identifies a lookalike, sound-alike, let's say a manufacturer has submitted a new product or a new molecule, and they are assigning a USAN name to it and have identified lookalike, sound-alike concerns, they might consult us, but we don't routinely evaluate for the lookalike, sound-alike for non-proprietary names. I mean, as you've alluded to, the non-proprietary name by design are supposed to have, some similarity if they belong to the same pharmacological class or have chemical traits. So,
right. The non-proprietary names really start with the World Health Organization INN, and USAN rarely changes them. They have in a few instances, but that doesn't happen very often. But I don't think the same type of testing, the same amount of testing is done with the non-proprietary names as it is with the brand names. And I think that's shown itself at times. We have seen, I think, currently, we probably see more name mix-ups with the non-proprietary name. For example, I mentioned the Joint Commission's list of drug name mix-ups that the hospitals were asked to look at, and almost all of them were non-proprietary names, like vincristine, vinblastin, for example, that would be very close and would get mixed up. I know they do put efforts into preventing that type of mix-up, but it doesn't have that same, to my knowledge, that same computer screening like POCA or anything like that I know of. And there's no, to my knowledge, there's no field testing as there would be with a brand name. Dorothy, can you add anything to that? That's a really good question.
Mike, I do think that there probably is some internal vetting of non-proprietary names that takes place within the industry company prior to their submission to World Health Organization or USAN, and some of that screening is performed during the creative phase. Those screens would include screening non-proprietary name to non-proprietary name, but they do also look at brand names as part of that pre-screening. However, there isn't necessarily a scientific methodology associated with testing for non-proprietary names.
And this is Susan. Also, USAN, my understanding is that unlike the FDA, who may, will approve or reject a name, the USAN Council will actually suggest alternative names to the sponsor. And then speaking from a commercial standpoint, because the sponsors don't own that name, once their drug goes off patent, they don't own that name. This is a personal opinion, is they don't have as much invested into the non-proprietary name as they do into the brand name, which they own, when they get their trademark registered.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a question here, Mike to Mike, that's me, I guess, regarding e-prescribing software. Are there any efforts to standardize how drug names are presented in e-prescribing software? I don't know about standardization, but you can order the drug by either name, and the drug will come on the screen. So you can order it with a non-proprietary name or a brand name. I guess most of the hospitals, instead of using the brand name, they do use the generic name primarily. But like I say, you can order it either way. But I don't know of any specific effort to standardize, other than we have the drug information vendors that make these databases available for use by the vendor computer systems. So they're the ones that are, I guess, standardizing it. There is a question about, and by the way, there is research going on. I should probably mention Northwestern University. They've done a lot with drug name mix-up prevention. And I know one thing they've been working on is indication-related alerts. So, for example, if you prescribe a drug for diabetes and the patient doesn't have diabetes, the system will ask the prescriber if they want to add diabetes to the patient's problem list. and then they have a choice of ignoring it or adding the problem, or discontinuing the order. And, generally you can see the order discontinued. So it is a way to prevent these name mix-ups, and more work is being done with that and many others as well. For Lubna, you mentioned that a sponsor should not reuse a discontinued name. Is this a hard and fast rule, or does it depend on the timing? If a product was discontinued after approval, but before it was launched or marketed, could that same name be reused? And what about a product that was discontinued a long time ago? Is there a time recommendation? I would tell you that even though you might think the name doesn't exist out there in drug indexes, it often does. So we've seen drugs that were discontinued 10 years ago that still show up on a computer system or drug name indexes. So, that's probably one reason not to reuse an older name that's been discontinued. Lubna, I'll let you answer the rest of that, though.
Sure. So, yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule. That's a recommendation. If manufacturers come in and they do want to reuse a proprietary name, and I think in the question it was mentioned that what if they had never launched the product at all? And in that scenario, I'm guessing they would probably want to reuse the name for another product. So we would have to assess the acceptability for that particular product, look at the product characteristics, and evaluate that. The other times, we could, if sponsors submit data showing us that, the length and extent of distribution that might show us that there is really no familiarity of the drug name, or show us that the reference text, electronic media, doesn't reference this particular product. We might entertain that, but again, that would be on a case-by-case basis, and it would, we would consider a lot of factors to make sure that the drug name familiarity does not exist for that particular product.
Very good. Here's another question. Is it possible to receive the slides after these very fine and clear, thank you, presentations from everyone? Yes, the slides are accessible. I read that at the very beginning when I was introducing everyone. Jordan, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
And will we be able to get those slides to people? How will that be done? Or they can download them now, or what?
It's only accessible as of right now while you're logged into the webinar. They're under the Handouts tab. It's a PDF file that you can save and print out. But we will not be emailing them now.
Okay, and will the presentation be available online for people to listen to?
I will send a follow-up email with the recorded version.
Excellent. So everybody will get that if they signed in. Okay, do we still have time for any more questions?
I think we're about time to go.
Okay, let me just choose one more. This is a good one. It's not so much a question as a comment, but it's absolutely true. The trend is towards longer drug names, but computer fields are limited in length such that we already have to abbreviate parts of the drug name in order to fit the drug name into the field with limited field length. And that does force, by the way, abbreviations, obviously. And this happens especially with drugs containing more than one active ingredient. And the recommendation that this individual makes is the databases and applications that utilize drug databases really should have longer drug name fields. And hopefully that will happen someday. Well, anyway, we're going to have to end it, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. If you have an urgent need to get that question answered, please email me, mcohen@ismp.org, mcohen@ismp.org, and I will mail it to the appropriate individual and ask them to get back to you. So with that, thanks again to all the speakers. Great presentation. Recording will be available. And that's it. Thanks for joining us. Bye now.